I'm also honored to be able to introduce Alex Wilson to everyone. And I'll read Alex's bio. And Alex will be presenting on food security. So Alex, food security presentation, Opaskwayak Cree Nation Community Garden, remapping traditional watersheds through community gardens, housing, and other land-based initiatives. Alex Wilson from Opaskwayak Cree Nation is a professor at the University of Saskatchewan. Her research and community work focuses on land-based education, land protection, and anti-oppressive education. She has been involved with the OCN Community Gardens and other local efforts to support sustainable living. She's also a Jedi Master. I heard she can float. No, I'm just kidding. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome Alex Wilson.
Thanks, Curtis. Tanse, Wasna, Snitisnigasan, Pamaskatapan, Opaskwayak, Ochinin. I'm from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, and thanks for the invitation to present here. And I caught the last part of Leo's presentation. That was just really phenomenal. And I love that, that quote that he ended with, that act locally to protect globally. And I think it does tie into what we're doing here in Opaskwayak with our community gardens and other local efforts. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint here so you can see some images, and most of them are from here. As many of you know, Opaskwayak Cree Nation is part of the boreal forest, but we're along the Saskatchewan River system, and we are along between the upper and the lower delta. So we're actually in the oldest part of the river, which means there's less tributaries, but also more impacts that we felt from influences up river and also down river. And you can see that in our region, like, of course, we're part of the boreal forest as well. So there's freshwater lakes and rivers and streams and all of that we for tens of thousands of years traveled up and down and relied on for our food, our medicine, our sustenance, and for fulfilling, just living fulfilling lives that were beautiful and sustaining. And of course, in a very short blink of the eye, all of that was changed through the process of colonization. And I just want to provide some context for our area, which is, probably overlapping with a lot of the people that are on here today with their territories. And if it's not exactly the same, there'll be the same kind of impacts that have happened from the same forces. And the first kind of thing is just the way that our territories were mapped or remapped. Because traditionally in our languages, we had ways of knowing how to get and share knowledge that to do with understanding the landscape and how the landscape changed over time and over the seasons. And so this colonial grid was kind of put on us, first of all, with the longitude, latitude mapping that explorers introduced. And then with that, the range road grid system. And that's this purple one in the middle here. And then, of course, for every square on that range road grid map, there's a monetary value attached. And the upper right is the Saskatchewan real estate map. And so you can basically look at any square of land and then find out, according to the realtors, how much that land is valued at. So in a very short period of time, our understanding of our connection to land as life and water, water obviously being part of land and air as well, our connection from that life-giving source was shifted to a monetary value. So now water is not life, water is megawatts of power converted to dollars. So the ideology shifted very quickly. And of course, all of that linked to resource extraction and other impacts. And the map on the bottom right is the Canadian well grid, which they describe as elegant, logical, and easy to understand. So here's this kind of sugarcoating the real danger and impacts that that these kind of just mapping systems have had on our communities. And so with this mapping comes an ideology that severs our connection to land. And in our region, we have a number of influences. One is the E.B. Campbell Dam, which is Sask Power, which is by Nipawin, which is upriver. And then downriver, we have the Manitoba Hydro Dam. And so our entire area, according to Manitoba Hydro, is considered, I forget the term they use, but it's kind of like reserve land, which is kind of ironic, but it's land that's kind of, they can overflow it. So if there's ever the need to open the floodways in Winnipeg and push water down through Lake Winnipeg, our region is considered the area where they can just push all that water to. And of course, that has happened many times since the late 60s when the Manitoba Hydro Dam was built. And the flooding and then the draining, the continual fluctuation of water has really impacted the lifestyles of people here, but also our connection to food security, and then our entire governance structures around access to food and other resources that we use for livelihood. The other major contributor to a destruction really of our waterways here is Ducks Unlimited. It's an American corporation that is in North America, South America, and now branching out elsewhere in the world. And they control a majority of the waterways within our traditional territory. And this has been going on for decades and decades. And during this entire time, there has been resistance and people speaking up about it. Indigenous people, farmers, and others who have been impacted the most by Ducks Unlimited putting in dams, micro dams, diverting waterways under the guise of creating a wetlands area to protect waterfowl, but that is completely false. It has not increased the number of waterfowl. In fact, in our area downstream from here, near the Summerberry Marsh, the number of waterfowl has decreased. The number of muskrats has decreased. Fishing has changed. So you see this really as a way to divert water for hydro usage so that they can get electrical power. So all of these things kind of interconnect. And then of course the anything that goes into the Saskatchewan River system, the north to south, and then the main Saskatchewan River, all of that flows downstream. And so the people that are furthest downstream often get the concentrated impact of pollutants that go in, whether it's just runoff from cities that go into your drains, or the phosphates that are resulting from fertilizer that's put on these big industrial farms in the prairie region. That all drains in. And then, we know about the oil spills, the Husky oil spill that happened, and other events that happen that just drain into the river. And then the people living downstream are impacted. And you know, it's not like getting diluted. In some cases, the pollutants and toxins actually are more concentrated. And it is Indigenous communities that are downstream that feel the impacts in asymmetrical ways. And so this is what we're dealing with. And all of these have contributed to us being unable to access foods and medicines in the way that we were able to even just one generation ago. So within my parents' generation, you know, they grew up off grid and hunted, trapped, farmed, and most of their food, a majority of their food came from the land. And within one generation, that has shifted very quickly. But the good news there is that there is a continuity of knowledge between that generation and the next generations. And so those elders are there to provide us with the knowledge of how to maintain those practices. And these are just some other examples to show how things connect. Upper left is the muskrat quota card, and pretty much every family here in Opaskwayak had one of these because we all had family trap lines, and some families continue to. And so the trapping was a form of livelihood from the furs, but also a major source of food because the muskrat, you know, because we eat muskrat. And so this is an example of the grid system that was recreated on another level here, dividing up into different areas and giving them names, some of them animal names, you know, and then the quota of how many muskrat you could catch in one year, and then how many they actually got. So this Charlie Wilson was my dad's dad. And already you'll see here that there's an erasure of Indigenous women, because obviously my grandma was there too, but she's not included on this card. So she didn't count as a human. So this erasure of women, Indigenous women, is happening on many different levels. And here it's just in terms of recognition of who is valid as a person harvesting muskrat. And then you can see every year that they caught the quota. My dad had one of these cards as well. And I asked him, how come every year, you know, you caught the quota? And he said, well, we always did. So this was a form of regulating livelihood, regulating access, similar to the permit to leave reserve was, and then regulating food. And, you know, we've heard this many times from community members and elders. It's like the process of harvesting, of planting, of accessing traditional foods or plant our own foods. The process is just as important as the actual product. And so that's something that we always try to keep in mind too, is that it isn't just the muskrat number as they've commodified here. It's also that process of going out there, of trapping, of understanding the land, of, you know, setting up their camps, of taking down their camps, of all of that contributed to the well-being of the community. And then just a couple of other examples here. Upper right is a blueprint, and people might wonder, what does a blueprint have to do with our connection to food and sovereignty and governance? But the housing issue, as many of you know, is like probably one of our number one issues that needs to be addressed right now. In our community here, we have a shortage of over 880 homes, meaning that not just 880 people, but potentially 880 families don't have housing or adequate housing right now. So that leads to quite a number of social challenges like overcrowding, of all kinds of issues that are involved with that. But this mapping of our territory, or this remapping by the federal government and other institutions or systems, has also meant that the way that reserves are designed, or First Nations are designed by the government, was very much aligned with taking inventory so that resources could be extracted. And the architecture plans of a community, and even of a house, were really about severing and disconnecting our land-based knowledge from the next generation. Communities are set up around churches usually, and then from there, they could decide who gets to be which church is going to attempt to assimilate and Christianize, and that has been a big part of the colonization process, as we all know, through residential school era. But housing has played a big part in that too, because our styles of housing that we made traditionally, as we had our camps, those were not validated as housing, and then these housing blueprints were assigned to the reserve houses. And as we all know, there's problems with mold and other things, that they were made substandard codes and things like that have impacted our wellness, really. And the bottom right here is, again, just to show how this gridding system aligns with the doctrine of discovery, and how putting your brand or name on dominating land has been really a part of this whole process. And this is the Ducks Unlimited logo. This is actually on the East Coast, and the president, or the owner of Irving Oil, was the CEO of Ducks Unlimited for decades. And in the 80s, when he retired as CEO, as a gift, they carved this duck's head into the marsh there. And really, it went unnoticed for a couple of decades, and then through drone footage, it was noticed, and then they're like, yeah, we did that as a gift. But it just shows how there's the consideration, or lack of consideration, for land as being an extension of our kinship has not been acknowledged, or in fact, it has been outright disregarded. And in this case, like putting a corporate brand logo on it. So it just shows the extent into which violence has been enacted on the land, but also the parallel process of how violence has been enacted on our bodies as Indigenous people. And in particular, Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people often feeling the brunt of that kind of asymmetric imposition of power and violence on our bodies. And it was just mentioned in the last presentation about the Amazon, and I'm sure others have brought it up, but how our boreal forest is also being deforested at a rate similar, or similar to the Amazon. And yet kids at school here are often doing their fundraising and being taught about the Amazon forest, when the same thing is happening right here, and literally in our backyards. This is a pile of logs that was clear cut from an area between Opaskwayak and Red Earth towards Saskatchewan, and that's old growth boreal. And they're forests that haven't been cut before, and this wood is highly desirable by corporations because the fibers are long and they're strong. So they have high tensile strength, and they in particular are very useful and needed or desired for pet food bags and cement bags and things like that. So meanwhile, we have a housing crisis, and then our wood here is being turned into pulp, special craft paper that's being shipped all over the world. And so this is just to demonstrate or illustrate how absurd colonial economics are, that we have to actually buy wood, bring back wood, import wood here to build houses. And we did measure this pile. It was 0.8 of a kilometer long. And in terms of square footage, there was enough wood in this pile to solve the housing crisis in northern Manitoba. The other thing that's happening here, you know, we know that trees exist in families. They have a kinship structure similar to we do as humans, and they communicate. And so this severing, this clear cutting of trees has also meant a severing of knowledge, or knowledge that's passed on to the next generation of trees. So, the term that's used is epistemicide. That's the severing of knowledge systems. We often hear the term genocide, and there's debate about whether Indigenous people faced genocide, not debate within the Indigenous community, but debate within like the Canadian Human Rights Museum and, the ones that do their exhibits on genocide. We know there's been genocide, but the other part to genocide is the severing of knowledge, so the intentional severing of knowledge through processes, policies, and procedures that have been part of colonization. So the question is, what happens to the next generation of trees if all their elders are gone at once? How do they learn to be trees? And, we could say that similar for humans. What happens when the knowledge transmission from one generation to the next is severed? How does the next generation learn to exist in good relation or relationally accountable to the land? And so these are some of the questions that that we think about all the time, but also act on. And again, acting locally to protect globally, as Leo said. Again, linking to the climate change, I know that we do live in an area that we can still drink out of lakes. Like I have a Tigamag Lake right behind me, Clearwater Lake, and my drinking water comes right from there. But even the most pristine seeming lakes, every lake, every river on the planet has microplastics. And that's disturbing. Every single water body has microplastics, no matter how isolated you are. So that we've come to this place that we're in right now, where we have a climate crisis. And, as talk about COP26, just that many people in the world just don't realize how urgent the situation is. And we've created this world where, with this quote, for every pound of human flesh, there's at least 1 million pounds of garbage. And that's technological garbage. That's referring to computers, phones, cars, all of that. And it's led to this crisis that we're in right now, that some say is going to be really difficult to reverse. So now more than ever, it is really critical that we center Indigenous knowledge, and that we validate Indigenous knowledge in every way that we can, which in turn can support Indigenous sovereignty. And This, to give this example, this was on Twitter, but I've used this activity with kids and with adults, and even third graders, they can identify every single brand logo on the left side. But yet, if you ask them about plants, or you ask them even about vegetables or other natural foods, they don't know any of them. They don't know what a carrot is. If they're identifying plants, they may be able to identify the one, and they will say that's the Canada leaf. So even that is linked to this kind of master narrative about Canada being, what Canada is, and very much aligned to corporate culture and the mass branding of life, really. So it just kind of goes to show how pervasive the problem is. And we're a community here where many people, I would say almost everybody, if they had the opportunity to choose wild foods over foods from the grocery store, I think most people would. But it's the lack of access right now that has really impacted us. And then just other factors as well. The internalization of our traditional foods not being good enough, or shaming around what people eat and people's behaviors and things like that. So all of these interconnect to put us in the situation that we're in right now in our community and many other communities as well. So I'm going to show this short video that we made as a community when we started our community gardens projects in 2013. And maybe give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound okay. I think I can see Curtis and if you can give me a thumbs up if you can hear.
Kina. Sunia Ganiwa. Ganiwa. Kistigana. Tom Nipigi. Nasko Metinan.
So that was, that we made that video a couple of years after we started the gardens, and I wanted to show it because we did apply for a small grant and we got funding from what was called Tides Canada then. And that was our final report. So often you have to do an evaluation and a report. And one of the things that we have been doing is working with philanthropists and other organizations that provide grants, and talking with them about how sometimes the grant process is just so onerous that it's not possible for a community to group to apply for them. And so we've continued that. We've done anti-racism training, anti-oppressive training with organizations so that they can understand the complexity of, why there isn't food security or why food sovereignty is necessary, and also to address kind of some of the white savior kind of narratives that exist out there. So we've done all of that. In turn, they've a lot of them have shifted some of their requirements And we joined a collective called the Northern Manitoba Community and Culture Collaborative. And that is communities across Northern Manitoba that are working together and sharing ideas and, what works, what doesn't work, and then providing learning resources for one another. And so these are just some photos from our community gardens. We have the Opaskwayak Bee Nation, and again, there's always a intergenerational communication happening where elders are involved and younger people. We did get funding for a Kubota tractor, and so that's been really helpful. Right now we've got 4 main gardens that are in different parts of our community. And then we've got a raspberry patch and one that's just potatoes. And then we've done guerrilla planting as well of wild of fruit trees, of berry bushes. We've done distribution of berry plants, and I think last year we did 500 and this year we did 200 or 300, and those have been really popular. And then during COVID, because our gardens are communal, everyone shares them. During COVID, some people wanted gardens just at their own homes, so we built 10, or I think it was 10 gardens just in people's yards. And then the other thing that we've been doing is again, trying to validate our own knowledge and language and share that with community members. So we created a calendar, and we put enough room on it for notes, because a lot of the older people here, they use a calendar to mark a significant times of the year, like when the first robins come, or when the ice on the river thaws. So people make note of that, and so we put that on there, and we used photos from different different people from the community collecting and harvesting traditional wild foods, but also from the gardens too. And this has also been really helpful for kids that are in care and or living not in Opaskwayak. So Child and Family Services and Métis Child and Family Services actually got a bunch of these books and sent them to community members that are in care in Winnipeg, or families that are living in other cities. And then this year we finished what was called the Planting, Harvesting, and Cooking Guide. And we have 6 youth that work in the garden as part of summer employment. And they really did a great job along with the elders, taking photos and then putting into this guide. So we try to have the Cree term for the food, if there is a Cree term for it, and then how to plant it, how to harvest, and then some ideas for cooking and some recipes. And then in the book, we also put a history of OCN, and then a history of, food in OCN, wild food and gardening. And this is available at Rand McNally in Saskatoon, and will be available, or McNally, sorry, will be available in Winnipeg as well. So if you're interested, you can pick up a guide. It's $22, and all of the money that we get from it goes to paying for our seeds for next year. So it's a way for us to raise money for the gardens to get our seeds. We use all organic heritage seeds, and we don't use any pesticides. It's all organic gardening. And then this is something that just came out, and I mentioned we're a part of the collaborative, the Northern Manitoba Food, Culture, and Community Collaborative. And this was a project that they did with youth that are in different Manitoba northern communities. And Opaskwayak it was part of that. And the collaborative uses this theory of change, and the theory of change really is about looking at the long-term goal of ultimately having food sovereignty and food security in northern Manitoba, and then figuring out how to get there through an iterative process with communities involved in the input, and then, you know, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and then continuing on from that. All based on the premise really that that change is desirable, and changes can happen, and change in a positive way that and it's online, and it's also a printed like a zine, and all the artists are young two-spirit people from Manitoba that took part, and then as and then a graphic artist as well. And then here's the pages from Opaskwayak that provides a little snapshot of our community and some photos from our gardens. And then the two youth that helped with the entire booklet, Michaela and Maxine, and just some information, some highlights about our community gardens. And yeah, so it's free if people want to get a copy. And then also please do join our community Facebook group, OCN Community Gardens, and we put updates on there, and we'll put the link for this on there as well. The mapping project, so this is one of the things that the community is involved in, and really we see this as a big part of our sovereignty and food sovereignty efforts. And you know, our place names were changed as, you know, part of colonization intentionally. And then also there were corporations where you could pay money, make a donation, and then get a lake named after you. Namely Ducks Unlimited did that. And we're trying to undo that by going back to our traditional place names. And many of the traditional place names had to do with what food was there. So like this was a tigameg, which is whitefish, and you know, cranberry, egg lake, goose lake, all of those names in Cree tell you the story of the way that our nation moved around to different camps in different seasons and gathered food or medicines or plants that we needed. And so renaming those or returning to the traditional names has really been a generative process, because it's created dialogue between the elders, and you know, them recalling the place names, but also stories around that, and then them passing that on to the next generation. And our ultimate goal is to, well, we've recorded a lot of those stories, but also we're going to make a giant floor map, and we've been working on this for about 3 years now, and so that it can be used in the schools as well, and help with other initiatives that are going on. Whoops. And then these are just some other photos. So I mentioned that, you know, most people do some kind of wild foods harvesting, whether it's fishing or hunting, like most of our families do that to some degree. And we do have a plan for a more formalized kind of fish filleting place where people can go and clean their fish, but also have, we've got a smokehouse and a feasting area. So this is kind of a plan for the future, where it just becomes part of the infrastructure of our community, where people can have free and safe access to some of these things that they may not have access to right now. And then we've also, we have a 25-foot Voyager canoe, and we take out, you know, people can go out on that, community members can sign it out, And then also when guests come, we take them on tours to show them, different, not just sightseeing, but really an understanding of how the land has changed, but also how there's a continuity of knowledge that really has provided us with the energy and the strength to continue, and all of that linking back to a healthy connection to land. And then just the housing issue, the way that we've kind of addressed it through land-based education and trying to build sustainable housing from products around here in a way that is not invasive, but in a way that can be where we can see housing as an extension of land, but also as a form of land protection. And that's ongoing. And then in the upper right is people that have come to visit the community. And as I mentioned, sometimes funders come and then we have done workshops with them and to show them, how complex the food issue is. It's not just about food, it's all the systems that are involved and interconnect. And then I just kind of wanted to end this part with the reminder that, Indigenous sovereignty is climate action. And I think we're all facing this issue of climate change right now. And one of the best ways to address it is to recognize that we have answers in our own communities, and to center and validate Indigenous knowledge is a big part of climate action.